When you say to Mum, "Mum, I want to play Dead by Daylight," and she replies, "We have Dead by Daylight at home," console Dead by Daylight is the Dead by Daylight you have at home. I started playing Dead by Daylight on PS4 in August of 2017. I didn't even know the game existed at the time, but one of my friends bought it for me as a birthday present, because our friend group had been enjoying the Friday the 13th game. It wasn't the first time this friend had bought me a game so that I would have to play it with him. If you're listening to this, you know who you are. You did it with Halo Reach too, back in high school. But you know what? We had some good times on these games, so thank you. I remember the very first game my friends and I played of Dead by Daylight. It was on Blood Lodge against the Trapper, and he completely and totally annihilated us. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know what a pallet was, I didn't know what a window was, and I'm pretty sure I didn't even know what a generator was. The Trapper quickly picked us off one by one, until I was the last one alive. My friends all spectated while I hid in the Blood Lodge, terrified, until the bad guy found me searching the chest upstairs and promptly murdered the shit out of me. Little did I know, this was the start of a 5-year-long Dead by Daylight journey, along which I would make close friends, mortal enemies, and start making videos on YouTube like I'd always thought about. I was so naive back then. I knew nothing about the game or who made it or that it was originally a PC game. I was confused by the idea of teachable perks, even after I'd had them explained to me multiple times. I just played as Dwight because he was the character who most looked like me. My friend chose Claudette because choosing her felt like it was akin to choosing a medic class in other games. Back then, Doctor was the most overpowered killer in the game because he could always find us no matter where we hid by shocking us and making us scream to reveal our positions. He countered the only viable strategy survivors have, hiding behind a tree or a rock at the edge of the map. It was complete bullshit that he was allowed to exist. I remember playing my first game as the Doctor on Rancid Abattoir and realizing that he was indeed overpowered. There was nowhere the poor, helpless survivors could hide from me and my bullshit zapping ability that made skill checks nigh impossible to succeed. I felt so guilty for playing such a broken character, and I knew how mean it was to kill people as killer from my time playing only survivor that I let everybody escape. It made clear to me more than ever that killers are all overpowered, evil pieces of shit. I went back to my salty Swift with my salty friends, and we continued to grit our teeth through every game, hating every killer who dared come within 32 meters of us. Over time, though, I learned what a pallet was, what a window was, what a generator was. I felt like I'd started to wrap my head around the game and how everything was supposed to work. I realized what blood points were, and how valuable they were when it came time to unlock something I wanted for my characters. I may not even have always known what I wanted to unlock, but I quickly came to know one thing for sure. I wanted blood points. I need all the perks I can get. I need to reach Prestige 3 on all my characters to show everyone how cool I am. I need to complete Dead by Daylight, and to do so, I need all the blood points I can get. The better you play, the more blood points you get. So I started trying to play better and do more each game to accrue as many points as possible. My friend would complain that I was wasting a perk slot by using We're Gonna Live Forever, but I could barely hear him over the sound of me spending blood point after blood point in the blood web. I realized that killers get more blood points than survivors, so I started to play more killer when my friends weren't online. I came to understand the role better and learned how to catch survivors and defend the generators. And then, something magical happened. Leatherface was added to the game, along with a teachable perk that is still just as important today as it was then. Barbecue and Chili, a blood point multiplying perk for killers. Daily now, I'm grinding out game after game of killer, using Barbecue and Chili and We're Gonna Live Forever to gain as many blood points as humanly possible. We would endure queue times longer than it takes people to speedrun all of Elden Ring, but the promise of blood points was just enough to keep us hooked anyway. Eventually, we realized that we could find each other in lobbies if one of us searched as killer. We would search for games until we found each other, and then farm as many blood points as we could get. Back then, bloody party streamers were a common offering, so we usually had plenty to go around. We'd spend ages hooking and unhooking each other, stunning the killer and healing, just to see the points go up so we could level up our characters. Back then, though, getting blood points was how you ranked up, so every time we farmed, we boosted ourselves higher into the ranks. And then, one fateful day, I loaded into a game as Leatherface on the same map on which my journey began, Blood Lodge. I found a Lori and began to chase her through the middle of the map until we reached a pallet. Naturally, I waited for her to drop it, as was the natural order. Only for some reason, she didn't drop it. In fact, she just kept running while I stood there in shock at the sight I had just witnessed. Why didn't she drop the pallet, I wondered. Is her controller broken? I proceeded to chase her to the next pallet, which, at the time, was about 3 feet away. Okay, this time she'll drop it. I'm so sure that she'll drop it, that I'm going to start revving my chainsaw so that I can destroy it faster. But she didn't drop that pallet either. She ran forward and away, and I was left alone at the pallet with my chainsaw above my head like a complete idiot. There was nothing I could do to stop her. She was invincible. I had to stop and wait at every pallet, and she could just run through it like it wasn't even there. What could I have done? I left her to chase a Dwight, but much to my dismay, he was doing the same thing. I couldn't catch either one of them. I was in way over my head all of a sudden. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't getting 4 stacks of barbecue and chili. I wasn't getting my blood points. I knew, though, that what had taken place that day was bigger than blood points. I could feel that my life was going to change forever. I never wanted to experience the humiliation of being tricked at a pallet like that again. I began to research the game a little online. Tofu, 72 hours, Zubat Lel. I began to descend deeper still into the rabbit hole that was learning Dead by Daylight. Before long, I found myself climbing the ranks legitimately, not just because I'd been farming blood points with my friends, all the while feverish, foaming at the mouth for more blood points. Everything was different now. Players were better, messages after games were more common, and I started to recognize the names of other players and remembering how they played or what builds they usually liked to use. Anytime something happened that my friends didn't like, a salty message would be sent to the killer and an argument would ensue. The game was becoming less and less fun as we overplayed it. The killer wasn't an opportunity for unique interactions and tense chases, but rather an irritating roadblock between us and the blood points to which we felt entitled. As we know, no amount of blood points is ever enough in Dead by Daylight. There is always more content around the corner, and even if there wasn't, getting every character to Prestige 3 with all perks was a monumental task in itself. All the while, though, I had become quite infatuated with the role of killer. It felt thrilling to try and outsmart and outmaneuver 4 other players at once by zooming around the map as the hillbilly or surprise attacking people as the wraith. When I was playing killer, I would often enter a flow state of focus, thinking about every decision and its consequences, as well as all the possibilities of any given moment. It reminded me of my glory days in Call of Duty, getting high kill streaks even though there were up to 6 people on the other team trying to stop me. Winning as killer was satisfying and fun, especially as I learned more about how to improve at the game. I learned about slugging survivors and hiding my red stain, among other strategies for catching people off guard. By now, though, I was unknowingly succumbing to the scourge that is video game addiction. As a man in his early 20s for whom life hadn't panned out according to plan, I felt lost, like I had no skills or motivation. I thought I wasn't good at anything. But I was good at Dead by Daylight. The better I got, though, the more I became able to notice the game's flaws. There were balance and design issues like vacuum pallets and exhaustion refreshing while running, sure, but what I really came to notice were issues with the game's performance. Survivors sometimes glitch out of the way of attacks due to random lag or latency issues, and my frame rate drops every time I use my power. When I reach Tier 3 Evil Within and lunge to down a survivor, my game freezes long enough for them to move out of the way and make it through a window or to a pallet. When I'm charging my chainsaw as the hillbilly, my frame rate is inconsistent, and keeping up with evasive survivors is really difficult in a frustrating, unintended way. When I teleport to a phantasm trap, I might as well have put myself in an envelope and mailed myself to the other player's house. It takes so long for the game to process what's happening. Frames vanishing into thin air, killers' attacks reaching me from meters away like they have telekinetic abilities or spring-activated arms, or as my friend Cass would say,
"He's got like Mr. Fantastic butter knives."
Knowing how to identify problems with the game's performance led to feeling robbed one way or another every game. If my game didn't freeze, that David wouldn't have made it through that window, which means he would have gone down, and I wouldn't have had to chase him to that pallet. Robbed of a hit, robbed of a down, robbed of a win, robbed of the little bit of joy I was able to find in my dark room with the blinds closed so I could see my screen while I grinded out game after frustrating game, my PlayStation roaring like it might take flight from trying to run the technical and graphical behemoth that is Dead by Daylight. I could tell when I took a hit whether or not it was because the killer's connection as the host of the game was bad, which was almost always the case. Every hit I took as Survivor was bullshit, even when it wasn't, because all I could think about was how terrible it felt to play Dead by Daylight. Where once I was having fun learning the game and discovering everything it had to offer, I felt only rage and resentment toward whatever was in my way of winning. I was so deep in the thralls of DBD addiction that I couldn't stop. I had gone too far, learned too much, invested too much of myself to turn back now. In desperation, I would scour the DBD subreddit and forums online to try and find a magical solution to the game's poor performance, some kind of setting I could change in or out of game, or a pagan ritual I could perform to appease the god of optimization, anything at all. But it was no use. There was no such solution available. Posts on the subject were riddled with comments by imbeciles saying that their console works just fine, the game runs perfectly. They would have me believe that maybe my console was dusty or dirty internally, or that I was imagining things. These filthy casuals were too stupid, too bad at the game, or both, to realize how terrible the situation really was. What if a developer saw that thread, with 3 upvotes and 4 comments, and read that the game was running fine on console because of one of these idiots? I would come to realize, however, that it wouldn't have ever mattered what anybody said online about console performance, because Behavior didn't actually care about their console players at all anyway. They knew nothing of the pain we went through every day just to enjoy their game that was supposed to be fun, or if they did, they weren't going to do anything about it. The console versions of Dead by Daylight were just an afterthought released because technically they could be released, regardless of whether or not the quality of the game was adequate. It wasn't just the performance that was worse on console. Downloadable content would come out weeks, sometimes up to a month late, because Behaviour's rocket science division hadn't yet developed the idea to not advertise content until it was ready to be released on all platforms. The Clown DLC and the 2.0 patch, including the removal of vacuum pallets and the addition of the in-game store and devotion system, released a whole month late on PlayStation. 1 month might not sound like much to any normies listening, but 1 month in internet years measures to about 9 months, sometimes longer. A whole month spent knowing that I could be owning shards, buying cute Fangmin outfits, raising my devotion level. But no. Like Squidward, I watched from my window as everybody else was enjoying the biggest and most exciting update DBD had received in a long time. In protest, after the Curtain Call DLC was finally made available on PlayStation, I didn't buy it. I didn't want them to have any of my money until they fixed the game and changed their console-neglecting ways, even if the clown sounded like he was going to be a top-tier killer. I mean, he can throw smoke bottles that slow survivors down so they can't get away. What are they even supposed to do against that? But you know, as they say, the night is sometimes darkest just before the dawn. For in my dark, depressing little life, there was suddenly a glimmer of light, a ray of hope. The official DBD Twitter posted a tweet promising that a patch dedicated to optimization was coming in December, which was then confirmed by the developers during one of their weekly live streams. I couldn't believe it. At long last, they finally acknowledged all of us who had been suffering this whole time. Our problems were going to be solved, our prayers answered. Console DBD was going to run at consistent 60 frames per second and not have a meltdown every time the killer would use their power. Perhaps this was what I needed to regain my faith in the game, to have hopes of once again enjoying the game I love so much, despite how little I got back from it. It could be everything I've ever wanted it to be and more. December rolls around. I haven't looked forward to an update like this since the 2.0 patch that came 1 month late, but this time will be different. Surely, Behaviour have learned their lesson from last time, and they'll come through for us. Concerns had been raised around whether or not the mythical December optimization patch would actually come, or if it was just going to be another empty promise. People had reason to be skeptical, given how Behaviour had handled their communication with their players in the past, but I knew they'd deliver. They had to. It was the morally right thing to do to make up for how much of myself I'd sunk into their game. December 14th, 2018. Behaviour fire up their live stream, and I'm in bed squinting at my phone screen at 3 AM to watch despite the time difference. I would have been awake anyway. I hadn't been able to sleep for months. Every time I closed my eyes, I would see flashes of survivors getting away for free because my game froze or my frames became choppy while back-revving. I don't remember anything they talked about because compared to the announcement of the optimization patch, nothing mattered. I was sweating more than if I was actually playing a game of DBD out of pure anticipation and anxiety. Surely it would be the next thing they talk about, I thought, as they went on about cosmetics and statistics or whatever it was. Now, at the time of recording this, I did try my best to find a clip from the live stream I'm talking about, but as far as I can tell, they've removed their December 2018 streams and there aren't any clips anywhere. There are posts from people talking about it, and from what I could gather, it happened mostly like I remember it. Either people were spamming the chat with questions about the patch, or the mods had picked out a question or two about it for the developers hosting the stream to see. As the hosts responded to the topic, it became apparent that they never intended to talk about it at all. It wasn't even on the agenda. The audience had to bring it up first. And as I'm sure you could have guessed by now, there was no patch. They glazed over the subject like it was nothing, acting surprised that anybody had been expecting them to talk about this mythical patch that never existed, let alone release it. My heart was completely and utterly broken. I felt like fucking Gretchen Wieners when she didn't get any candy canes. Just like the Legion who was released a few days prior, I entered feral frenzy and sprinted around my room in my underwear, stabbing whatever I could find with a pencil from my bedside table, screaming, "Why?" over and over, until I became exhausted and went, "Arr!" How could they do this to me? I was in complete disbelief, along with many others in the audience, some of whom took to Reddit and the forums to express their anger and disappointment. User Bro I'm Gay said, "Honestly, it just feels bad to be a supporter of the game and to get lied to by the devs so blatantly. The appropriate thing would have been to say that optimization wasn't coming when it was expected as early as possible. Instead, they waited until everyone was up in arms about it, and when they realized people weren't going to drop it, they released a sorry-ass announcement saying it's coming in the spring now, which I have zero faith in. I've rooted for Behaviour since I started playing the game with the PS4 because I love supporting a small team, but I won't be handing them my money until console is less of a mess." Not Queen, the community manager, would later contradict herself and say that no such patch was ever coming, but that small improvements to optimization would come in future patches, which would come every few months or so, which, in internet time, is 100 years. Why would we believe anything she said on the subject now anyway? Needless to say, I was in deep wound. My bleed bar was going down, but I didn't even want to mend. I would have been happy to just collapse into the dying state. The game that I rely on for my daily happiness and a sense of accomplishment in my life isn't providing me with what I need. I knew what I needed to do. There was only one thing I could do. I had to upgrade to a PS4 Pro to try and get more frames in Dead by Daylight. Me and my friend, who bought me the game originally, as well as another friend, all took our PS4s to EB Games to trade them in for a discounted price on PS4 Pros. It was a fun little trip, but I wasn't really present in my mind. I was playing DBD in my head, throwing hatchets at everyone who would walk by, or imagining them stepping into traps I'd set earlier, those fools. And you know what? Upgrading to the Pro kind of worked a little bit. It was a little bit better, but it still wasn't enough. After all the hurt and pain I'd been through, it could never be good enough. There was a hole inside me that no number of frames per second could ever fill now. Behavior's betrayal had forever stained the game for me. I still think back sometimes about what it could have been if they just listened and followed through on their promises of optimization. After some time, some soul-searching, and some breaks from Dead by Daylight, I came to accept it for what it was and tried to worry less about the game in general. But that brings us to today, where console players face a new kind of problem. Since crossplay was introduced and skill-based matchmaking was implemented, the game is more competitive than ever. Survivors are harder to catch than ever, especially if you choose to play a skill-based killer while using a controller. Don't get me wrong, console players aren't inherently less skilled or intelligent than PC players when it comes to Dead by Daylight or gaming in general. It's just that it's unrealistically difficult to play skill-based killers to the standard that high-level DBD demands. In fact, as a side note, I played Trickster in the week or so leading up to this video to try and get some background gameplay, and I found that I played worse in areas of the game that weren't even aim-dependent. I realized that because so much of my focus and energy was going into trying to aim my knives, I was less capable of predicting what survivors would do. I made mistakes I wouldn't normally make because the bulk of my attention was required elsewhere in a disproportionate way, but I digress. Tier lists made by people who play the PC version of the game often include aim-dependent killers like Huntress, Trickster, and Deathslinger pretty high up, but I doubt they would do so if they played those characters with a controller. I'm sure that frame rate could have something to do with it, but I don't think that's even close to the real issue. While I know that some players would see that DBD is capped at 60 frames per second and want to vomit, changing it to 120 probably isn't going to improve your aim by a huge margin. No, there's something else that's much more important, and that's aim assist and a secondary sensitivity option. The aiming and sensitivity options are not robust enough by today's standards. In fact, it's pretty weird they weren't available years ago in one form or another. Almost every first-person game that requires you to aim at things has aim assist for controller players. I've played a lot of Call of Duty in my time. I'm actually pretty good at COD. But if you take away my aim assist, I turn into a potato that couldn't shoot the side of fractured cowshed with a shotgun from 10 meters away. I'll include here some clips of me dying to my friend Beck during games in which I had disabled my aim assist. On one hand, it is different in COD to have no aim assist because it goes against my muscle memory I've developed over years of playtime. On the other though, this is the same Beck who canonically, within the Jimmy Snakehands universe, TM, has two lazy eyes, and who was born with her left thumb where her right thumb's supposed to go, and her right thumb where her left thumb is meant to be. And now, back to Dead by Daylight. I'm gonna let this clip speak for itself. As you can see, I look like a fucking idiot. I look like the most boosted ape to ever walk the earth. But is it my fault? Yeah, kind of. I'm sure I could improve my knife throwing in general and get better at Trickster. But is it entirely my fault? Hell no, because there is no aim assist in Dead by Daylight for aim-based killers, and they're a nightmare to play without it. Look, whatever you're imagining aim assist to look like, especially if you've never played a first-person shooter using a controller, is entirely subjective and isn't necessarily what I'm suggesting. My idea of aim assist might be different to yours, possibly less effective and more subtle than you might think. To be clear, when I talk about aim assist, I'm not talking about target assist or auto aim like you might find in Grand Theft Auto or COD Zombies, where you just tap the aim button and have the game move your aim to the nearest target. I'm talking about the speed of your aim slowing slightly when the center of your screen is over a target, in DBD's case, a survivor, or possibly a zombie if you're playing as Nemesis. If controller players had aim assist as killer, it would give them the chance to actually use aim-based killers in the way they're intended to be used, or at least closer to the difficulty at which they're designed to be played. Behavior have changed aiming and sensitivity twice in the past. The first time, they fixed an issue with diagonal inputs on both left and right sticks for controllers. I don't know enough about it from a technical standpoint to explain it, and the one Google search I did didn't give me what I wanted in the first 3 results, so the information clearly doesn't exist. But as far as I can tell, when you would move the stick diagonally, the game would simulate diagonal movement by repeating the 2 directions on either side of the input. So if you wanted to aim diagonally up to the left, the game would read that as up and left inputs alternating, as opposed to an actual diagonal direction. Minecraft used to have the same issue on PS4 from what I remember. The second change was one to sensitivity speeds. They increased what 100% sensitivity felt like to provide a wider range of sensitivity options, which was a much needed change, especially for when you try to play as a nurse using a controller. Aside from aim slowdown over targets, aim slowdown during different actions is a crucial feature in first-person aiming games. In shooters, so long as you're aiming down sight, which is what the Deathslinger does when he raises his gun, your sensitivity is lowered accordingly. In Borderlands, the slowdown is more intense for sniper rifles than for submachine guns. In Minecraft, aiming a bow will slow your aim so you can be more precise at distance. Now, as Huntress, you can charge a hatchet for so long that releasing it would tear a survivor in half, but your aim wouldn't slow down whatsoever, and it would be unreliable to try and hit a target at mid to long range. If most of the interactions in DBD didn't happen at close range, it might be reasonable to lower your sensitivity to help with aim-based killers, but if you lower it too much, you can't turn fast enough to hit survivors with your basic attack. In the end, you end up with a sensitivity that's kind of in the middle, that's too slow at close range and too fast at long range. Being able to set a secondary sensitivity speed that determines how fast you turn or aim while charging a hatchet, aiming knives, your tentacle thing, your gun, your chains, maybe even while vomiting, throwing a bottle, or using rites of judgment, would be such a game-changing feature for controller users that would open up new dimensions of play for many killers in the current roster. Now, all this said, aim assist wouldn't come to Dead by Daylight without a few drawbacks, the worst of which being that it would inadvertently counter stealth. If you swept your aim from left to right while looking from one side of the map to the other, and there was a survivor there that you otherwise wouldn't have seen, you'd know there was someone there because your aim would slow down when you targeted them. Using tracking perks and skills as killer is fundamental to Dead by Daylight, and to undermine that by providing an unfair advantage in the form of aim assist would be detrimental to the flow of the game. Another issue, albeit a more technical one, is how or whether aim assist would work through intangible visual blockers like corn or bamboo. If you moved your aim from left to right across the corn on Thompson House, and it slowed down because the survivor was cleansing a totem, it wouldn't be fair or make any sense. That said, losing aim assist because the survivor ran into the corn or through some reeds would feel jarring and unintuitive as killer. It would be frustrating to be aiming a hatchet at a survivor, only to have your aim suddenly speed up because they ran through something intangible in the distance. At the end of the day, it's probably best that we don't add aim assist, but I think it's crucial that we add a secondary sensitivity option for different killer actions. That said, I know behavior don't really care, and this video isn't for them or to try and get anything changed really. It's for you, whoever you are. And if you liked this video, you can let me know by pressing the like button, and it helps me gauge whether or not these video essay style videos are landing or not and tells me I should keep making more of them. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you made it this far, you can check under your seat and you will find a cookie there.